Welcome back to another episode of the Pre-Match Pint. In homage to Gareth Southgate, we are once again going with a midfield double pivot. I am your number 8. I am Luke James, and I'm joined on the other side of central midfield by Callum. Ison Dan is still away gallivanting in Scotland. Over the past 7 days, Callum, what has caught your attention?
Well, I mean, I think we're going to talk about it. Obviously, I've had my rants about England this week, and more specifically Southgate. So we'll get into that into a bit more detail. Obviously, this is something me and Dan will probably talk about a bit more when Dan's back. But the NBA is really in full swing now. We're getting into the conference finals. So last night, the Milwaukee Bucks were knocked out by the Miami Heat in 5 games, which is a really big loss. And there's a lot of speculation about Giannis Antetokounmpo's future. So that'll be really interesting to see. And then later on tonight, we've got obviously the Lakers and the Clippers both playing again. Both LA teams look like they're going to progress into conference finals. So yeah, we're really setting ourselves up for a really interesting NBA final, which me and Dan will look forward to speaking about in a couple of weeks' time when he's back.
For sure, I can add absolutely nothing to the NBA thing you've just said. But I mean, a lot of people had the Bucks down as the favourites, didn't they? And again, I think LeBron James broke another record last night, which is again quite impressive. The thing that caught my attention this week that we're not going to talk about necessarily is the US Open. So, of course, Rafa Nadal said, I'm not playing. I don't want to be in the United States at the moment. Fair enough. Roger Federer is injured, which left only Novak Djokovic as one of the big 3 competing in the men's side of the draw. Djokovic has been eliminated from the tournament. He was disqualified from the tournament for hitting a line judge with a rogue ball after losing the game in the first set of his, I think, 4th or 3rd round match, which will mean for the first time, I think, in 16 years that we're going to have a quarterfinal with none of the big 3 and, of course, a new winner at a Grand Slam event. Alex Zverev is already into the semi-finals, so that should be interesting. On the women's side of the draw, Osaka's through. Serena Williams is still in the competition. I think if Williams doesn't win it now, I don't think she's ever going to win another Grand Slam. I think this really is her opportunity, especially with it being behind closed doors. The women's side of the draw is always interesting because it's a little bit more unpredictable, but I think the men's side this year is just totally up in the air and absolutely anything can happen.
Yeah, you've obviously got TM as well, haven't you? So are you kind of expecting a TM Zverev final? Because in my eyes, I think that's kind of what I'm expecting.
Yeah, I think TM will probably win. I think he's probably got more of the temperament than Zverev. Like, he's had some issues recently with kind of losing games that he should win. I feel like he's close, but he's not quite there. I think it's probably kind of the Austrians' time to shine at this point. I think the women's side of the draw, you could just pick any of them and it could happen. It's so difficult to predict.
Women's tennis is just really interesting though, because I don't know if we've had this discussion on here before, but it always feels like women's tennis, they don't seem to stick around at the top of the game as often as men. Like, from kind of when I started watching tennis, obviously Federer, Nadal, Djokovic have always been at the top, but from the women's game, there's always seems to be someone new and fresh coming through, or one of the top kind of 10 kind of like falling off and not being as good as they used to be. So I think actually women's tennis is probably a lot more interesting than men's in my eyes.
In terms of the competition as a whole, I'd say so. And it's important to remember that we've grown up in such a weird era of tennis where the men's side has just been utterly dominated by 3 people. And kind of you have Federer being the one who's kind of the most long-standing of the 3. And then you had Djokovic emerge. You had Nadal emerge slightly before him too. And obviously you had the period when it was the big 4. You had Murray up there, but of course his kind of hip injury has put that to rest. I think, yeah, tennis is fascinating. I really love tennis, and especially Wimbledon. It's the best tournament for me personally. But this year has been so odd. And you look at the US Open, the women's side, I think it was only 3 of the top 10 in the world participated in the US Open because of COVID-19 restrictions and just an unwillingness to take part at the moment. And that's a huge loss because the likes of kind of Ashley Barty isn't participating in the US Open or the French Open. She won the French Open last year, the Australian player. And yeah, there's lots of examples where players, especially based in Europe, just didn't want to compete in the US Open. And again, with a look towards the French Open, I think the organisers in France want to have 11,000 spectators in the grounds during the tournament per day. And I think the reason that Barty pulled out was she just didn't want to be involved in the tournament with that many spectators present. And again, it's a true testament to player power in tennis, because you wouldn't see that in many other sports. And again, it'll be interesting to see if Rafa Nadal decides to take part, because this, again, the French Open is his tournament, is the one that he always wins. So he is hoping that he does kind of head to Paris at this kind of later this month, which I think will be interesting to see. I feel like we should probably start with Gareth Southgate, Callum, because you've had a couple of quite interesting tweets about the topic. So, of course, we'll set the scene. So England have played 2 international matches over the past weekend. We beat Iceland by 1-0, courtesy of a Raheem Sterling 90th minute penalty, I believe, something like that. And then, of course, last night on Tuesday at the time of recording, England played out a exceptionally dull 0-0 draw against Iceland, in which the One Football app described, and I think this was about half an hour through the game, so they was very confident that nothing was going to change. I got a notification saying this is like the worst game of 2020, and again, there have been some proper kind of stinkers this year. I mean, I've watched many of them. So, Callum, what's going on with England? Why are you so annoyed about Gareth Southgate, and what should we do next?
Well, what's going on with England is an interesting point. I mean, the new dubbing is like kind of like the new golden generation, but I don't want to use that term because, I mean, the last golden generation was not exactly great in the end, so I don't think we can really say that. But yeah, for me at the moment, I just terribly frustrated with Gareth Southgate and kind of how he's setting up that team. I mean, if you kind of look at like the prospects we have in an attack, we have such good prospects there. Obviously, Jadon Sancho, Raheem Sterling, Harry Kane. I think Darren Bent tweeted last night saying that the fact Danny Ings scored 22 goals in the Premier League last season and got 22 minutes in his first England call-up since 2015 is an absolute joke. And one of my problems, first off, is that Southgate has always prided himself on picking players on form rather than reputation. But at the moment, that seems to have gone out the window. He didn't pick Jack Grealish to start off when he first selected his team and was kind of forced into that decision. The fact he's picking Jordan Pickford in goal still is a joke when Nick Pope was literally named in the PFA Team of the Year last night. And then just the whole tactical setup. So, I mean, I tweeted on the game against Iceland that Southgate doesn't have a tactical identity at all. I mean, in the World Cup, I'm pretty sure we played a 4-3-3 kind of system, but sometimes we're trying 5 at the back with Kyle Walker in the centre back, and he's kind of doing that more than ever now. He's really flicking between formations, and at the moment he just doesn't seem to know what personnel he wants to choose. I mean, he started Kieran Trippier at left back, and I know from my experience at a very low level football that being a right-footed player playing at left back is extremely hard if you aren't doing it. So I mean, I know Kieran Trippier is a lot more senior than me, but to be thrown into an England game with that inexperience there is pretty terrible. And then kind of, last night, I mean, I can't remember what paper it was, but one of the papers basically reported the lineup very early on in the day. And that team for me, I was like, I'm not putting myself through watching a Gareth Southgate side where we're playing 5 at the back with a double pivot with 2 of the most defensive players in England's midfield in Dyer and Calvin Phillips. If you're going to play Dyer or Phillips, play one of them and play them next to someone more progressive. I know Henderson's out at the moment, but even then, Henderson's not progressive in the terms of maybe Mason Mount or Jack Grealish. And then you were seeing tweets like, England are struggling to get up the pitch and the gap between the strikers and the midfield is too large. It's like, well, what do you expect? You're playing 2 defensive midfielders that are supposed to sit in front of the defence. So, yeah, for me, I just think there's a completely tactical inconsistency with Southgate. And he's just kind of nullifying the kind of attacking threat we have in that team at the moment. But I'm sure we'll go into more detail, but that's my kind of like immediate rant over.
It's tricky with England because, as you say, there are lots of players kind of coming to a high level in kind of their careers and even at the start of their careers as well, who are so talented and playing attacking positions. Like we've got Marcus Rashford, Harry Kane, of course, kind of the best striker we have, Jadon Sancho, Raheem Sterling, Jack Grealish, James Maddison. We've got all of these players who have lots of potential. And of course, that's not to mention the 2 players kind of disgraced before the second international that we've just had. Southgate has lots of options. And again, I think I said this on the last podcast, he just does seem to have an aversion to playing number 10s. He doesn't like having an attacking midfielder. I think he sees them as kind of a waste of a player, especially kind of on the defensive transition. I just don't believe that he thinks they give the team enough. I'll read out the England team that took on Denmark because I think it's important just to kind of recap. So we had Pickford in goal with a back three of Gomez, Cody, and Dyer. You then had wing backs of Alexander-Arnold and Trippier. Midfield, you had Declan Rice and Calvin Phillips. And then up front, you had Sancho, Kane, and Sterling. The substitutions for England, you had Maitland-Niles come on in the 87th minute for Alexander-Arnold. Jack Grealish came on after 76 minutes for Calvin Phillips. And then Mason Mount came on for Jadon Sancho after the hour mark. It's a weird team, isn't it? Because I personally, and we said this off kind of air as well, I don't really dislike the 5-2-3, 3-4-3-1 system, 3-4-3 system. I think it can work. And again, you look at the Chelsea team under Antonio Conte, it did work in the Premier League. There is kind of evidence of that. It's just, as you say, it was the wrong personnel. It was far too defensive. And it reminds me of kind of a spell that West Ham had under Sam Allardyce, where he'd pick Alex Song, Mark Noble, and Kayute, so 3 defensive midfielders, and then kind of be confused. Well, there wasn't really much of an attacking outlet. It was just a bit odd. And yeah, I honestly believe that Gareth Southgate is fundamentally a defensive manager. When you look, and again, Southgate talks a lot about keeping possession and about kind of being good on the ball and all this kind of stuff. But we never see with this England team a willingness to kind of advance the play, to play progressive passes forwards. I mean, there's lots of kind of like 60, 70-yard cross pitch passes to the opposite winger. But possession for England is kind of keep it around the defence. It's more, basically, England like defensive possession, don't they? They don't have attacking possession in the sense where you're trying to manoeuvre the other team around. It's like, we'll keep the ball so they can't score. My final point before I throw this back to you, Callum, is... Oh, actually, I'll put it over as a question. Had Jordan Pickford not been the hero, the penalty-saving hero at the World Cup, would he still be first-choice goalkeeper for England?
No, there's no chance he would be. And once again, kind of what I said about Southgate picking players based on the team basically they play for. If Nick Pope went and played for Chelsea this season, Nick Pope would become England's number one, hands down. There isn't a question about it. If he went and had a season like he had last season at a team like Chelsea, Nick Pope would be England's number one. So I know he'll say that he obviously played Connor Cody last night and played Calvin Phillips, who hasn't even played a game in the Premier League yet. But I mean, he was very much kind of forced into their decisions in the end. I think Cody got a late call up. And kind of, I think if Foden and Greenwood probably hadn't have been caught trying to break COVID rules and bringing girls back to the hotel, I'm not actually sure whether Calvin Phillips would have played as much as he did. To be fair to Calvin Phillips, I from the highlights I watched, I was actually really, really impressed by him. I actually think he was probably England's best player last night. I think his role in that team was quite interesting. So that's the thing. I don't hate him or Rice. I think they're actually both quality players, but they play in the same position and play very similar styles. But Calvin Phillips last night, kind of his role, he'd sweep up across the back four, and he kind of acted like a quarterback in a sense. He was pinging long balls out to either winger. But once again, going back to the problem, you've got so much space when you're playing 2 defensive-minded players between your front 3 and then you're basically back 7. And if you want to play counter-attacking football, the worst striker I think in the world for playing counter-attacking football is Harry Kane. You cannot play counter-attacking football with him as striker. He's fairly decent at holding up the ball, but I wouldn't say that's one of his specialties. He's clearly not quick, and the reason he gets quite a few goals, he's kind of a poacher, but he's just a great finisher as well. So if you're expecting to be able to ping long balls over the top with Calvin Phillips, then to Harry Kane to run onto, you're kind of mistaken. Like, it works for Arsenal because they've got Aubameyang up front. So for me, I think if Gareth Southgate's going to kind of go for this more counter-attacking, defensive possession kind of team, he has to rethink Harry Kane's position in that team. And I mean, you don't want to lose literally the top scorer of the World Cup. So he's got to pick between probably that system or Harry Kane's kind of profit as a striker.
Yeah, I'll ask the question. Do you agree that England are best as a counter-attacking team? Do you think that's kind of the setup that Southgate should look towards, or do you think we should be more possession-orientated, or just simply just attacking kind of from the get-go?
It's interesting. Like, I think counter-attacking definitely has its benefits. Can give you a really nice structural position in defence. But kind of, if it depends what kind of counter-attacking you want to go for, because I think what we saw last night, kind of from what I picked up, is that we're going to sacrifice our wingers in terms of defensive positioning. So they'll kind of be similar to what Liverpool do. They kind of push up high on the pitch and get ready in counter-attacking positions, which, I mean, it leaves a massive gap between your fullback and your winger, which is quite easy to exploit if a team can pick up on that. So I think there's definitely some benefits to the system, but I don't think that's the best counter-attacking system that you can use. I said, you've already said, we spoke about it off air, and we kind of both agreed that a formation we'd actually quite like to see England play if we want to get the best out of Harry Kane, it's probably a 4-4-2, which kind of when you're in attacking possession probably comes into more like a 4-2-4 with Sancho and Sterling on either wing, and then I think pairing Harry Kane up front with a pacier striker in either Danny Ings or, you said, Marcus Rashford would work a lot better. You obviously then would have the benefits of both of the two strikers and Harry Kane being able to kind of win flick-ons and get in a box to finish, whilst you have a pacier player being able to close down from the front. But then also, when you're out of possession, you obviously can slot into a 4-4-2 and kind of have Sterling and Sancho dropping back a little bit more. And then he can play the midfield if he really wanted of Rice, Dyer, or Calvin Phillips, because if you're going to have a 4-2-4 going forward, sacrificing two players to sit in front of your defence and kind of cover or sweep up the balls coming forward isn't a bad system. So I think there's definitely better systems you can use than that kind of 5-2-3 that he was using last night, which is just a bizarre formation anyway.
Yeah, part of the rationale, when we were talking about this last night, part of the rationale behind the idea of saying England should play 4-4-2 is Gareth Southgate has an aversion to attacking midfielders. He simply just won't use one. And again, I think this has crept up on people because this has been a theme throughout his time as England manager, but it's only really come to a head now because everyone is desperate to see Jack Grealish start for England. Everyone's desperate to see James Maddison start for England. And then you've kind of got the back and forth between supporters of those two clubs. I think that's an issue. So he's not going to play 4-2-3-1 quite simply because he just doesn't like number 10s. It's just not going to happen. And then you look at the alternatives and you say, well, if he wants quite a boring central midfield partnership, either of 2 4s or a 4 and an 8, then you have to have kind of options out wide. So then the 4-4-2 might work in a conventional sense. So you just have especially your right fullback, who will be Alexander-Arnold pushing on, overlapping on the right-hand side. Your left back probably sits a little bit deeper, and then you have kind of, obviously, your two central defenders sitting deep, and the two central midfielders kind of having more of a disciplined role in the team. So 4-4-2 for England probably works to an extent. It just depends whether you're willing to sacrifice that extra body in midfield, although he did last night, so theoretically Southgate would be willing to do so. What I would say about England as well is our best players, or the players who play in the most successful teams in England, are all at their best when their teams counter-attack. So some of my kind of favourite Manchester City goals are when they break at pace, they break really, really quickly and score a far post tap in, and then invariably it's normally Raheem Sterling who's involved. And again, with Liverpool, some of Liverpool's most effective work is when they notice that the team's out of shape at the other end of the pitch, counter-attack really quickly, put the cross into the box, and they score. And again, we've got players who play for both of those teams. You've got Sterling, kind of Trent Alexander-Arnold, Jordan Henderson when he's fit, etc., who would quite happily play on the transition. So there's no reason to say that England have to be a possession team. And I don't think England have a history of even... English football isn't predicated on the idea of possession being a good thing. I mean, you look at kind of the... kind of exaggerated version of kind of English football history is basically kick it to the big lad. And there isn't a history of finesse in English football. And I think counter-attacking for this English team is a happy kind of halfway house between playing this tiki-taka style that was so kind of influential during kind of Spain's period of dominance and doing something a little bit more modern, because I don't think, and again, people get blown away by this, but tiki-taka isn't, for me, an attractive brand of football, because it's about retaining possession, it's about killing the game off, it's about scoring one goal and then sitting back. Like the Spanish team under Vincent Del Bosque was very defensive and didn't score many goals. This is a team that won the World Cup by winning several games 1-0 and kind of doing it like that. It wasn't exciting. And again, early Barcelona under Pep Guardiola wasn't particularly exciting either. So I don't think we need to go down this possession route. I don't think people particularly care how England play because we get to a World Cup. So hear me out. So we get to a World Cup. People are going to watch it anyway. Realistically, no one really cares about the qualifiers. No one particularly cares about the Nations League either. So you get to the World Cup and you have this, obviously not in kind of pandemic era, but you have this big swell of support behind the team. Again, if they're popular in the press, so on and so forth. And then you get behind the team throughout the tournament. And if they go far in the tournament, as we saw in 2018, people get excited about it. England didn't play a great style of football in 2018. We were quite defensive, beat quite a few kind of low-level opponents, and then lost twice to Belgium and Croatia. So it's not like the 2018 World Cup was this roaring success. I don't subscribe to the view that it was all kind of a sham and England were never that good in the first place. I think it was a good tournament for England. But the point is, it doesn't take much to get English people on side to support the national team. And I just feel like if we had this style of football that just played to the strengths of the majority of the team, that would make sense. So the question I was going to throw to you, if Harry Kane didn't exist, would England be a counter-attacking team? Is this all because we're trying to pigeonhole Kane into a team that is not massively built to his strengths?
I guess you got to look at it probably different kind of eras, because obviously I think Kane kind of basically kept Vardy out of that side when Vardy was at his peak with Leicester. Obviously, I mean, he's still at his peak with Leicester, but obviously he doesn't want to play international football. And I think with Vardy in the side, we probably would have played counter-attacking football. I mean, Vardy is pretty much the perfect player to play counter-attacking football with. Rashford, again, I think Rashford can play a really nice counter-attacking game. There was a goal last season where him, Bruno Fernandes, Mason Greenwood and Martial literally ran the length of the pitch with the ball and ended up scoring a really nice work goal. So that he could definitely play as the focal point of his counter-attacking team. But if you're going to use Danny Ings, who I think probably should be at the moment England's second choice striker, I don't think he's necessarily your counter-attacking kind of striker. I think he can play it, but I think there's a lot more benefits to Danny Ings' game than getting him in a counter-attack. But yeah, I think with Kane isn't, for England, Kane isn't actually as good as people think. I don't think Kane scores goals, but in the World Cup we saw a lot of his goals came from penalties. He can win himself a foul very, very well. He's very good at getting fouls, which, I mean, is a benefit to the England team because their set pieces are brilliant. And a lot of our goals from the World Cup came from corners or free kicks. But Harry Kane in an England system is not, I actually don't think, the best choice in striker. But obviously you will not drop him. But if I was picking a striker, I wouldn't pick Harry Kane.
I agree. And again, without wanting to sound like kind of football Twitter at this point, a lot of Harry Kane's goals at the international level come against kind of lower quality defences, or at the World Cup were from set pieces and penalties. And again, I don't think that should detract from the fact that he had a very good goal scoring record for England. I just feel like if you put someone else in the team, they probably score the same goals too. I don't think Harry Kane adds anything to this team. I don't think he massively. I don't think he's a huge drag on the quality of this England squad. I think he's a good player to definitely have in the team. I just don't think on his own up front as a lone striker, he is kind of the catalyst for this squad. I just believe that, kind of, as you say, there's probably better choices elsewhere, whether that be Danny Ings based on form, someone like Marcus Rashford based on kind of the profile of kind of his style of play. Do you think kind of we're in the group with Belgium, Denmark and Iceland? Do you think we'll qualify for the finals, or do you not see us beating Belgium?
Oh, no, then I don't think there's a chance in hell we beat Belgium. Belgium's team is so good. The fact they haven't reached a final is kind of criminal. Because I think Belgium's side is really, really good. I actually think if the Euros had been this year, they've done superbly. And just kind of going back to that Harry Kane point really quick, I don't think that should be seen as a hit on Harry Kane from either of us. Well, certainly not from me. Because once again, I think it is that Southgate doesn't know how to use him efficiently, and I think that's kind of another problem with Southgate. You kind of said about Vincent Del Bosque and Pep Guardiola knowing how to manage games. I don't think Southgate knows how to manage a game. I think it's very rare you see him make a tactical swap that you think, oh yeah, that'll work, that'll shut the team out. And to be honest, I don't think he's a great man manager either. I think he's a great motivator. I think that's the one thing you can say about Gareth Southgate is he's brilliant at motivating the team, but he's definitely not the tactical manager that I think you kind of want at international level. And I think that's one of the reasons that kind of Roberto Di Matteo will kind of be able to get the better of Gareth Southgate's side, because Roberto Di Matteo, in my eyes, is a much better tactical manager.
Yeah, I can't particularly see England beating Belgium, if I'm being totally honest. However, slightly, I do think that maybe Southgate is testing this system, testing this combination of players with the view of playing defensively against Belgium and hoping to nick a goal late in a game and winning it that way. Could this be an era where, rather than focusing on England's attacking strengths, we kind of look more towards an Italian style of play and approach things defensively? I mean, it's possible. I think it would be disappointing, and I don't think it would kind of bring lots of kind of neutrals on board. But I think there's maybe a reason to believe that could be kind of the approach that Southgate is taking. It could be possible that he thinks, well, our attacking players are good enough to make the most of any opportunities they get. So therefore, I need to focus more on having a strong defence and kind of letting the strikers and the wingers feed off of the scraps from the rest of the game. Do you think that's possible, or do we just kind of disagree fundamentally with what's going on with England at the moment?
Well, obviously it is possible. I mean, okay, maybe not Sterling's probably not a good example, but I think obviously Harry Kane and Sancho have both scored goals in high press situations and kind of out of nowhere. I do once again. I think it is unfair. Obviously, the only reason I'm kind of saying about Sterling not being able to do that is kind of his miss against Lyon. But kind of you have seen an evolution of Sterling as a finisher since he's been working with Pep Guardiola. And going back to the World Cup, if Harry Kane had squared it to him in the semi-final, Sterling probably would have scored. Like, I doubt he would have missed that chance. But it's strange. I don't know if you can really split the team that much in terms of, right, we're going to have this many people in defence and then we'll only have 3 people up front just because they're world class. I mean, they are world class, but look at the players they're playing with in their respective teams. I mean, Sancho has obviously Haaland, Borussia Dortmund kind of has Axel Witsel in behind him in pre-season. Jude Bellingham's been supplying him with some assists and looks quality. And then if you look at Tottenham as well, obviously, a lot of the time when Harry Kane works really well, he has Heung-min Son working up beside him, or maybe even Lucas Moura. So I think Harry Kane definitely needs more support than 2 wingers. And Sterling, once again, you obviously have Kevin De Bruyne, Aguero. So there's a lot of people in the team, in all of them teams, who kind of assist all 3 of them players in terms of like their attacking duties. So to kind of leave them up front on their own as a 3 is kind of, especially if teams are setting up with a 4-back, you're leaving 4 against 3 most of the time, unless they're pushing their 4-backs forward. I just don't see it working in terms of an attacking sense. In a defensive sense, yeah, it does work. I mean, we saw that last night. We shut out Denmark, who Denmark on a bad side. I was very impressed by Kasper Dolberg, and I've really liked Kasper Dolberg since he was at Ajax. Obviously, Christian Eriksen, who's a great player. We know that from his Tottenham days. But really, we should be beating Denmark, and the lack of chances that we created in that game is a real worry.
It's difficult with England because before Southgate came into the job, I think everyone was very, very negative about the national team, and kind of you looked across the home nations and Wales were doing a much better job kind of under previous management as well. And then you had Gareth Southgate come in, and you had this big positive World Cup. And now we're in the situation where it feels like kind of waistcoat mania has sort of started to subside, and we're looking into a more kind of pessimistic era of kind of English football. If Southgate left today, I think this is probably going to be the final point we cover on this. If Southgate left today, who would you want to see as the next England manager?
In terms of who I want to see, my first pick would be Jesse Marsch from Salzburg, and that'll be really rogue, and it will never ever happen. He's got many years ahead of him in club management, in my eyes. But Jesse Marsch's style of football is that it's superb. Really, it can kind of flick between a counter-attacking or a possession-based style depending on who you're playing, and I think we saw that against Liverpool. In the game away at Anfield, Salzburg were a lot more counter-attacking, but at home they controlled the possession and actually created a lot more chances and didn't switch formation. Jesse Marsch is probably my first choice, but that's not going to happen. I mean, obviously the obvious choice for most people would say is Eddie Howe, but I think you will say this as well, and I definitely agree, is that it is kind of a sideways step. He's a bigger name and he's been linked with bigger jobs, and that's the only reason that people really want him in an England management. But is Eddie Howe actually a better manager than Southgate? It's hard to say, especially at international level. I'm not sure it would work. The realistic one, but once again, there's probably some people that would argue it wouldn't work. But someone that I think would be great is Arsene Wenger. I think Arsene Wenger's kind of club career is kind of over, but as an international manager, we've seen what he can do with young players. And we know he's a great manager. So I'd love to see Arsene Wenger in an England job. And I think a lot of people obviously argue, kind of since Capello, that you can't have a foreign manager managing an England side, or any kind of foreign manager managing a team that isn't their national team. But I think with Wenger, there's kind of because he has been in the English game for so long, and kind of the modern day Premier League that we see was massively influenced by him. I don't actually think he would be a bad fit for England. I actually think he would get the English game a lot more than a lot of the foreign managers.
Yeah, I agree. What I would say, I think Eddie Howe would be the worst solution. I think he's a worse manager than Gareth Southgate. And you look at the money that Bournemouth have spent over recent years. They've invested heavily. Again, it might be harsh to lay this at Eddie Howe's door, but they've spent a lot of money on young players in particular, and they've just not come off. Whether that's an issue with the recruitment process at Bournemouth, or whether that's partly on Eddie Howe as well, remains to be seen. But I worry about that. And again, you look at Eddie Howe's team, and it's been years. I know he's not manager anymore, but it's been years and years and years since Bournemouth actually played the attacking brand of football that people liked them for. Like, you watched Bournemouth in 2019 and you watched them in 2018, and they were an absolute shadow of themselves kind of compared to the high-scoring team that got promoted. And again, the idea of that was to shore up the defence, make it easy to stay in the Premier League, and kind of build a firmer base for the future. But people liked Eddie Howe because he was this maverick young English coach who played an attacking 4-4-2 and kind of tried to stick it to the big boys. And again, you got to the end of his reign at Bournemouth, and they were getting kind of beaten pretty convincingly by the likes of Liverpool, Manchester City in deep defensive 4-4-2 blocks. And I feel like if we don't like Gareth Southgate because he's a defensive manager with an aversion to number 10s, then Eddie Howe isn't the person we need. My love for Jesse Marsch is well documented. I think he'd be a great manager for England, but again, it's realistically not going to happen at this point. I think it's a number of years away from that. And again, he said that he wants to manage the US men's national team, so I can't see him taking the England job before then. If you're interested in hearing more about Jesse Marsch, I did write an article about his career for World Football Index, so take a look at that. Last suggestion was Arsene Wenger. I agree. I think he'd be a really interesting pick. And I think about the squad that he'd pick, he'd go 4-3-3 or 4-2-3-1 probably, although, of course, towards the end of his Arsenal career, he did play three at the back of lacked Antonio Conte in the cup final is the memorable game. I like that suggestion. I like Wenger quite a lot, but he's 70. And, I mean, the World Cup is 2 years away, so he'll be 72 by the time we get to the World Cup. Would he then want to take us to the European Championships age 74? I mean, I'm slightly skeptical, but we could see, I guess. But yeah, I think that kind of speaks to the issue as well. The names we're talking about, they're quite thin on the ground. There's not that many options, and especially English managers who you could readily kind of install as the new national team manager. And again, like Sean Dyche is unhappy at Burnley, but if we're not happy with Gareth Southgate because of his brand of football, then Sean Dyche again might not be the answer.
Yeah, there is a real lack of quality England potential managers, I think. Obviously, you said Sean Dyche, but I think the only other one that people probably would look at in the Premier League at the moment that could potentially manage England is Steve Bruce. And I mean, that's once again kind of the similar situation to both Southgate and Sean Dyche, is that the brand of football is just not attractive. But maybe that's just kind of what we've got to kind of realise, that we're not going to ever get a manager. Well, at the moment, we're not going to get a manager that is going to play attractive football. But my problem with Southgate is that it's not exactly the style of football. It's the people he's picking to play that style of football. I don't think it's the correct choices, but I think it could work with the correct personnel. But at the moment, it's just not.
Final thoughts on England, Callum. Are we going to win the European Championships next year?
I don't think I ever thought we was going to win it, but I don't think we'll do awfully. But I just don't want it. I kind of hope we do well with a nice style of football with the correct people in the team, rather than it kind of was a fluke at the World Cup. Like, it wasn't ever amazing, but I won't say I didn't enjoy it, because I loved every single minute of it. But I don't think we're going to do as well as we did at the World Cup, because I think a lot of the teams have got better, whilst I actually think maybe we've regressed a little bit.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think we're going to win the Euros. I'll ask you this as well. Who is going to win the Euros if England aren't?
I thought going into it this year, I thought France. And to be honest, I probably think that he's probably going to stay the same. I think there's something in France at the moment. There's been years since France had a really strong team and a really strong youth team, but kind of France's team, it is getting a little bit older. Obviously, Griezmann's getting older, Hugo Lloris is getting older, but the youth coming through in France is exceptional. I mean, they've got that Camavinga who made his debut last night at just the age of 17. I think he was the third youngest player to ever make his appearance at France, and he looks ready made for football already. And then they've got plenty of other talent coming through in like Ligue 1. They've got a guy called Adil, I can't say his surname, but he plays for Saint Etienne, who looks really good. They got Adley, who also looks really nice. And then I don't really think you can kind of look past that team at the moment. I think they played last night. I don't actually know that score, but first of all, have you seen that Lovren goal against France last night?
I haven't. No.
I recommend everybody goes and watches this Lovren goal. I think Liverpool should sign him back as their backup striker. It is beautiful. But yeah, I think France's base as a team is great, and I think the youth coming through that can kind of bleed fresh blood into that team next year is superb.
Yeah, I agree, which is exceptionally boring, but I do think France are the best team, definitely in Europe. I mean, any team with Mbappe up front is just going to be devastatingly good at a kind of knockout tournament. So yeah, I think that's quite concerning for the other teams in the competition. Before we move on, I will give a rogue shout out as well to the Faroe Islands for winning back-to-back games for the first time in like 26 years. And they to beat Malta in the second game, I think they won 3-2, and they scored a free kick from about 30 yards in the last minute, which again is quite nice. It's quite feel good kind of football at that stage. So yeah, I do recommend kind of having a look at those highlights too. Of course, this weekend marks the return of the Premier League, and as always with football related podcasts, we should probably do some predictions and get everything horrifically wrong. Are you excited for the Premier League to return, Callum?
I mean, of course. I think the Premier League is probably one of the greatest tournaments in the world, and I think a lot of the top teams in the league this year have kind of strengthened, which is only a benefit to the league, because even as a Liverpool fan, the past 2 seasons where it has been either Man City or Liverpool, or the past 4 years probably, that it's Man City kind of dominating it. You don't want it to go down that route. You don't want it to become a Bundesliga or a League. So I think it's great that they're strengthening. And I'm really excited to see Leeds back in the Premier League, especially under Marcelo Bielsa. I mean, their fan base is just incredible anyway. So I think watching Leeds this year will be really exciting. So yeah, it's definitely going to be an interesting season in my eyes.
For sure, I agree. I'm not too excited from a partisan perspective. I think this could be quite a miserable season for me personally. I am really excited to see the Premier League come back, though. I'm, and again, you'll get this message throughout the rest of the podcast, but I'm genuinely really looking forward to seeing Chelsea play. I love their business. I think, and especially if they sign a goalkeeper, which it does look like they're going to over the next couple of days, I think Chelsea could be seriously good this season. And again, you look further down the league as well, and we're going to do predictions in a moment. But Everton, for the first time in a while, have really strengthened. Well, it seems anyway, have strengthened brilliantly in the transfer market this summer. They've done some ridiculous business. And again, you look at the group of teams kind of outside the traditional top six. Everton have done great transfer business. Wolves were already a good team, but have dropped 40 million on an 18-year-old. Leicester, again, really interesting team. Then you've got teams like Southampton, who ended the season so strongly. Newcastle United done really good transfer business. Sheffield United were really good last season. I think they'll probably kind of decline a little bit this year, but still they'll be good. And then Leeds United, who everyone keeps talking about. There's a true decent chunk of teams who should kind of make up the middle of the pack this year. And I think normally it's a case of top six and then 7th to 10th is normally the categories. But this year I think it's more like top six and then 7th down to 12th-ish. I think it's going to be so interesting to see how it unfolds. I feel like we should start with the predictions. Callum, would you like to go bottom up or top down?
Should go top down because I feel like the top is kind of more of a nailed on kind of decision in terms of your like top six, whereas the kind of bottom, you can throw quite a few teams into the mix there.
Yeah, so we're not going to do 1 to 20 predictions in depth, although I can list them off anyway. But starting off with, do you want to go 6th or 1st to begin?
Should go 6th. We'll go 6th up.
Okay, so Callum, who have you got 6th?
So I've gone with Tottenham in 6th. I think I really actually like what Jose Mourinho is doing with that team, and I think I spoke about this last week. If you watch their preseason, they've gone with this 5-back formation. I think will really suit Matt Doherty, one of their signings. So I think it's a great signing. I think he only costs 15 million. I mean, it's a bargain, really. And then obviously they've got kind of their full strength team for the first time in quite a while. Harry Kane is back, Heung-min Son's back, and I think they'll do well. But I just think a lot of the teams above them have strengthened quite drastically. So I think Tottenham will have a good season, but I don't think they're going to push on any further than 6th.
Okay, for sure. So 6th place for me. 6th place for me. I'm going for Arsenal, which might raise some eyebrows. I think they've got a good team, and I quite like their business as well. They've probably not done enough though for me. I think kind of Gabriel should be a good player. I think Willian is okay, but I don't think he's going to set the world on fire. The one I'm most excited to see kind of come back this year is William Sevilla. I think he's looked like a great defender in Ligue 1 last year. Is in line to start on the opening weekend of the season as well, so that should be interesting as well. The issue with Arsenal, the reason I've not put them higher, is just they still have that inconsistency streak, and I'm not convinced that they're totally out of that kind of headspace. And with European football, they'll have as well. It could be slightly problematic in terms of kind of consistency throughout the season, especially when fixtures start to mount up. And the biggest question marks at Arsenal as well, obviously, they've still got Mesut Ozil at the club. Will he play any role, or will he just kind of sit on a beach for the rest of the year? And the other one is Alexandre Lacazette. There's been reports that he could potentially leave the Emirates I would say summer, but it's kind of into the autumn now anyway. And again, that's another big player that they could lose. And Aubameyang hasn't signed a new contract yet either. So there's just, although I like Arteta, and I think Arteta will do good in the long run for Arsenal if he's given the time, I feel like they're probably below kind of the rest of the top 6 at this point. Callum, in 5th position, who have you gone for?
I think this might probably raise more eyebrows than your selection of Arsenal in 6th. I've gone for Man United in 5th, and I think it's important to caveat that, and we probably should have done this before, but it's important that we're kind of talking about this whilst deals haven't been done. So if Sancho goes to Man United, it could bump up a little bit more, or if they get a really strong centre back, I think it would bump them up a little bit more. But kind of my worry at the moment is their one main signing at the moment is obviously Donny van de Beek, And don't get me wrong, he's a superb player. I can't believe he hasn't been bought from Ajax before this has happened. But to me, I think the one position in Man United's team that hasn't been strengthened is their defence. Wan-Bissaka is a great defender, and Harry Maguire is also a really good defender. But the problem with Harry Maguire is he is kind of put next to someone who is less reliable. And Harry Maguire in himself isn't reliable anyway. So if you've got two calamitous defenders in your team, it's a massive problem. And especially given that Chelsea have strengthened, I think Arsenal looks far superior under Arteta than they did under Emery. I think Man United's defence could be kind of a weak point for them. And to be honest, I don't really like Luke Shaw either. So they're linked with Reguilon from from Real Madrid at the moment. And he'd be a great signing. So once again, that would bump him up. But for me, I think Manchester United going forward are a great side, but I think there's definitely some issues at the back, and I don't think they've strengthened enough. And to be honest, I just don't know if Ole Gunnar Solskjaer is kind of the manager to push Man United up into kind of the new era of dominance for that team.
I think on Manchester United, I'll talk about them on kind of my predictions in a minute. I worry about the lack of balance in midfield, because potentially their best three midfielders are Van der Beek, who is a number 10, isn't he? But he's not a playmaker. He is just an attacking midfielder who likes to link the play. He's obviously a great player and should probably be in the starting lineup. And Ole Gunnar Solskjaer has said that these three players will be in his team together, or he hopes to put them in the team together, which is really concerning, in my opinion. And then obviously Paul Pogba, who again prefers attacking to defending, and Bruno Fernandes, who again prefers attacking to defending. And I just look at that team and I'm like, where's the balance? How does that midfield work together? And again, all of those players that we've listed like to be very progressive in possession. They like to get the ball forward as quickly as possible, and that's great. And again, too much of a good thing is a bad thing, essentially. You need someone in your team who's going to be happy to kind of get their foot on the ball, slow the tempo down, and keep possession. And an example, this isn't Man United related, but I remember West Ham were playing Crystal Palace, and it was late in the game. West Ham were winning the match. I think it was probably 2-1. The ball was sent over to Mikel Antonio, who was playing on the wing. He should have run to the corner flag. He didn't. Crystal Palace then went up the other end and scored. And sometimes you just need a player who's willing to do the unpopular, unfashionable thing and just slow the pace of the game down. And if you have Fernandes, Pogba, Van der Beek in the same team, I worry that might not be the case. However, I do have them finishing in the top four. In fifth position, I have Tottenham Hotspur. Again, I feel like this is slightly rogue as well. In my notes, I've said this is slightly irrational, but I have a fair amount of faith that Mourinho pulls off a decent season despite a lack of signings. That's essentially it, really. I just have a gut feeling that with Mourinho, his strengths and weaknesses aside, I think he's probably got enough about him to lead Tottenham to fifth. You look at their transfer business, they've signed Giovanni Lo Celso permanently. He's a good player. He should kind of be embedded into the spine of the team this season. You've got Matt Doherty, who you've spoken about, who again is a good player, and it probably means the end of the road for Serge Aurier. And again, Pierre Højbjerg, who I've really liked since he joined Southampton. I think he's a great player, and at 14 million, according to Transfer Market, I think that's a great sign. And then, of course, the best signing of the summer for me, Joe Hart on a free transfer. Just incredible business from Tottenham. So yeah, I think Tottenham should have enough to finish fifth, and I think losing Kyle Walker-Peters and Jan Vertonghen isn't the end of the world. And again, we've been watching the Amazon documentary, and it's very clear, having watched kind of the first 6 episodes of the series, that Mourinho is trying to instill this siege mentality that was so obvious at Chelsea and so obvious kind of at other clubs he's managed. And if he gets that right, and if players start to buy into that, it could work to his benefit. But again, who knows? Callum, who is making fourth position for you?
So yeah, in fourth, I've gone with Arsenal. And I kind of already said that I think what Arteta's doing at Arsenal is I really, really actually like what he's doing. I kind of think we saw in the Community Shield that he kind of can set up his team to kind of nullify the top teams in the league. And for me, I don't think that's something Arsenal have had in recent years. If you kind of look back just off the top of my head, like some of the Liverpool results, they were getting absolutely smashed. And it was because they were still kind of in that mindset that they was a top team and that they could attack these teams. But I think Arteta's come in with a realization that Arsenal do have to do something different against the top teams in order to get a result. But I also think the young talent coming through at Arsenal at the moment is superb. Obviously, they've got Bukayo Saka, who's amazing. They've got Gabriel Martinelli. They got Eddie Nketiah, Joe Wilson. And then, as you said already, William Saliba is a great signing at centre back. I think they signed Pablo Mari, who he's good to cover. And I just like what Arteta's doing. I think Arteta's kind of instilling this winning mentality into the Arsenal team that they kind of haven't had. I think they have all kind of thought over recent years that when we are not winning anything, whereas Arteta's come in, obviously won 2 trophies in less than half a season, really. So I think Arsenal will be really strong this year. And I just think that their team has improved, whereas kind of Manchester United haven't. And I think Manchester United will kind of see that they need improvements in that team if they want to really push on.
Yeah, I think the reason I've gone Man U over Arsenal is I think Manchester United have a higher ceiling, and whether or not Arteta or Solskjaer is the better manager out of those two, I feel like United players probably just about drag them into the top 4. And again, Man U are 4th for me, and I think kind of having Dean Henderson back at the club, having Marcos Rojo back at the club, apparently the Argentine has really impressed Solskjaer since returning. He's been doing double training sessions since returning from loan from kind of an Argentinian club. I think they lack a lot of balance. I really do. I am quite worried about United. I just think they have enough quality to see them through, which is quite regressive in terms of analysis, but I think they'll probably have just enough. With United, the thing to watch out for is the battle for the number 1 shirt. I hate what they're doing with goalkeepers at Manchester United. I feel like you either back David De Gea by loaning Dean Henderson out, and you say, David, this is your last year, kind of make it a special one, or you say, David, thanks so much for your services to the club. Goodbye now. We'll let you leave it like in this summer. I don't think it makes sense to have Dean Henderson, who is one of England's best goalkeepers, although kind of remove that logic from the conversation anyway. Dean Henderson was one of the best goalkeepers in the Premier League last year. It doesn't matter that he's English. It makes no sense to have him on the bench. And it looks like you're going to have Dean Henderson starting on the bench this year, which is just ridiculous. And again, if the situation was the other way around, I'd say the same thing. If Dean Henderson was starting the season and David De Gea was on the bench, that is the worst example of squad management ever, because you look at football clubs. I make this kind of comparison a lot, but whatever the team's budget is essentially their salary cap. Manchester United spend, 200 grand a week, I'd guess, 150 grand a week on David De Gea. You could get a backup goalkeeper for 50 grand a week and spend an extra 100 grand a week elsewhere on your squad and strengthen another position, whether that be a backup or a new central defender, a younger central defender, whatever it might be. And I just think it's a horrible use of kind of resources to have Henderson, who signed a new contract. So again, he's going to be on more money as well, and De Gea at the club. Callum, who is going to finish 3rd under your arithmetic?
For me, I can't see that top 2 being broken. And as much as I really, 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 really like Chelsea's business, they've got a 40-point gap to close on Liverpool, which in a season is massive. And I think even though Liverpool haven't strengthened, I think there's, as you kind of said about tactics, there's sometimes too much of a good thing. And I think Chelsea have strengthened in mass. And I think the fact that they've brought in so many new players, it will take a while for the team to gel. And I'll go into actually a bit more detail in terms of what I actually think will happen. I think Chelsea will struggle at the start. And to be honest, I think with the amount that they spend, I think Roman Abramovich will probably sack Frank Lampard by Christmas, purely because I don't think they'll get off to a flying start. And I think he'll be expecting Frank Lampard to be challenging for a title this year. There's no hiding my love for Kai Havertz. I think he's one of the best players, young players in the world. And to be honest, I think he'll go on to win a Ballon d'Or. He's that good. So I think the fact they've got here is a massive coup. But they've bought so many attacking players from various different leagues as well. If you're going to throw them all in at once, it's going to be tough for them to gel. And obviously they haven't got the options to fall back into, because obviously they let Willian go on a free, and Pedro has also gone. So two of the two people in a Chelsea team that have been there for many years and know what the Premier League's about have kind of gone. So they haven't got them people to fall back onto. So if Ziyech doesn't start off as you expect, then you've got Mason Mount, who's been great. But apart from Mason Mount, who else have you got really? There's no one that immediately springs to mind. Callum Hudson-Odoi, but he hasn't exactly set the league on fire since he got his new contract. And then, as I said, this is based off of the transfers happening now. Kepa for me is still a massive worry, and even though they've got Thiago in, and I think Thiago will really assure that defence, there's still players from that Chelsea team last year who know what Kepa's like and know that there's going to be a lack of confidence in that team. So I think for me, if Chelsea need to sort out the goalkeeper situation massively, and then once again, kind of what you said about Manchester United, I think it kind of links to Chelsea as well. There seems to be, if you look at their team, there is a massive lack of balance in that team. And people really don't know how I think Frank Lampard's going to kind of set up this year, because there's talk that obviously you can play Kovacic, who provides a little bit more defensive mindset in the midfield. But is he going to really sacrifice either like Havertz or Ziyech from Kovacic? So his midfield three could be, once again, really, really attacking. And from watching Havertz at Leverkusen, he's great going forward and can play at various different positions across the front line. He can play as a 10, he can play as a 9, play on either wing. His defensive output isn't actually amazing. So if you're going to rely on a midfield three of what Havertz, Ziyech, and for the life of me, I can't think of the third, but it's a bit worrying, which is why I think they've kind of been linked with Declan Rice, because they need someone that will be happy to sit back as kind of like an anchor man and just kind of sweep up the loose balls and get the team on the front foot. But at the moment, I think that midfield balance is a worry.
We disagree on Chelsea quite a lot, but we'll get to my take on Chelsea later. Third place for me, this is going to give a lot away, is Manchester City, which again is slightly rogue, but we'll go there anyway. I look at their kind of, I have a bad feeling about Manchester City. And a lot of it comes from that defeat against Lyon. And I just look at them and I think Lyon aren't that good. Like, they've got good players. They're an okay Champions League team, but they're not amazing. Like worse teams have beaten Lyon. I think Rangers played a pre-tournament friendly against Lyon and held their own. And I just think with Manchester City, especially with not signing Lionel Messi, which obviously has hit the news cycle as well, we've not mentioned that. I just look at them and I just feel like they're missing something. And kind of my feeling about the top of the Premier League this year is this is going to be a lower quality season than we've seen before in terms of the top ranking teams. And you talk about there being a 40-point gap between Chelsea and Liverpool last season. Yeah, but I think Chelsea might gain 20 points and I think Liverpool City will lose 20 points, is my opinion. I think there's going to be so much more movement in terms of the league this year. And so the reason I've got Manchester City in third is Aguero's fitness concerns me a little bit. I mean, he's becoming more injury prone as he gets older. They've signed Torres from Valencia, who's a great player, and he's going to go on to do really good things, but he's probably not going to start this year. So I can't really consider that as something that's massively strengthening their team. The other one they've signed is Nathan Ake for 40 million from Bournemouth. And again, I kind of bang on a lot about left-footed centre-backs kind of off air. But Nathan Ake is an interesting player, but I don't think he's probably going to start. And again, it's like, are you strengthening or are you adding depth? And Man City already had a lot of depth. Is this the end of the road for Pep Guardiola in England? Maybe. Could we get to a situation where halfway through the season he says, yeah, I'm not going to sign a new contract. This is the end. Where does the motivation come from? Ultimately, I just don't feel warm and fuzzy inside about Man City.
Yeah, I kind of get you. We'll go for the top one now, because obviously there's only two teams left. So I've actually got Man City winning the league. So we kind of clearly think very differently. I get your point about Nathan Ake, but for me, it is definitely a depth thing. You saw a lot last year when Laporte was missing, that Pep Guardiola really struggled with his tactics because he didn't have a left-footed centre-back being able to play the balls out from the back. And I think the fact that they brought in Nathan Ake, who clearly is happy to sit on the bench and be the replacement for Laporte when needed, is quite good for Pep Guardiola's tactics. It allows them to play the out ball a little bit more, and they aren't having to use Fernandinho at centre-back in that case. And obviously, if you're not using Fernandinho at centre-back, you're allowing him to be in his best position, where he probably excelled as one of the best centre defensive mids in the world a couple of seasons ago. So I really think that's a really great signing. And I really like Ferran Torres as well. I think he's a great winger, really young. And I think he'll be a pretty good replacement for Sane. I do think losing Sane is a massive blow to Man City, but I don't think Pep Guardiola rated him as much as people outside of the club did, because Sane wasn't ever really a first choice player apart from maybe the first season he came in, but he wasn't ever really in favour of Pep Guardiola. So I think Ferran Torres will kind of play that similar role to Sane, that it will come in when Manchester City need an injection of pace down the wing. The only thing that there's two things actually. I think that as much as I do think City will win the league, I don't think it'll be comfortable, but I'll kind of go into Liverpool a bit more in a minute. I think two things worry me. Is one, they've let Claudio Bravo go, and I think that means that Scott Carson is now their backup goalkeeper. So Scott Carson wasn't a bad goalkeeper, but he hasn't really played much professional football recently. And Edison has, on occasion, been injured or on occasion been red carded, which leaves Manchester City in the need to use their reserve goalkeeper, very much like the Alisson situation with Adrian last season. And is Carson a better second choice goalkeeper than Adrian? Absolutely no chance at his age. That could be a real worry. So I think Manchester City probably need to address that in the transfer market, getting in a second choice goalkeeper. And that's easier said than done. I had this conversation with people on Twitter the other day. I think picking a backup players is really hard anyway, but picking up a backup goalkeeper is exceptionally hard, because I think a lot of goalkeepers really want to play first team football. And then the other thing that worries me is I think it's because of what happened to Man City when Vincent Kompany left. They're losing a massive leader in their dressing room in David Silva. And David Silva, somehow got into the team of the year for last night. He's a great player, but did he deserve that? No. But they're replacing him with Phil Foden. And Phil Foden's obviously a great player, but is he a leader on the pitch and off the pitch? No. So I think that could massively affect them. But I do think their team is still really strong. Liverpool kind of walked the league last year, but it wasn't without some sort of luck. Man City got quite a few injuries, whereas Liverpool kind of went the season with only a few injuries. Maybe Alisson was the biggest loss, but Man City definitely had far more. But yeah, kind of looking at Liverpool, because obviously I think a lot of people would say they are the closest rivals to Man City in terms of the league. I said this to you at the end of last week. Part of me has this really horrible feeling that Liverpool could end up in a situation like Leicester, like Chelsea in 2013-14, after 2013-14 season, where they kind of fall off completely and fall out of the top four. That's purely because they haven't strengthened their team, and it wouldn't be as much of a worry if we'd have gone out and spent loads last summer, but we're now having 2 seasons in a row where we're going to have the same players in the dressing room, same players on the pitch. The only thing that I think is really interesting with Liverpool, and it's kind of filled me with a lot of hope that we will do well this season, apart from my obvious scepticism, because I'm always quite sceptical about Liverpool, is the fact that Klopp seems to be switching up his formation. He seems to be moving away from a 4-3-3 into more of a 4-2-3-1, which is actually really interesting when you watch it. Against Arsenal Community Shield, they was our best spells in the game when we was playing in that formation. In both the games against Salzburg and Blackpool, they're not superb opposition, but we played far better with that system. And it gives Firmino the kind of license to drop back into a role he was playing at Hoffenheim. And also Minamino. Minamino looks like the player we knew he was getting in him when he's playing in that number 10 role. And it means that we kind of have to have a double pivot at the back. And obviously there are reports that Gini Wijnaldum, who is kind of vital to Liverpool's current system, going to Barcelona. But we played Naby Keita in a double pivot with Curtis Jones the other day, and it's a lot more aggressive and progressive football from Liverpool. And that is the true part of Liverpool games that is really exciting. They're a really good attacking team. So if they're going to implement a tactical system that allows them to press onto the front foot, then it fills me with more hope than kind of sticking with that 4-3-3 system, which was kind of, it was great. It won us a league, but it wasn't as like exciting, and definitely wasn't as we weren't doing things that were unexpected. A lot of the time, people knew that the balls would come from out wide, whereas kind of this new system allows you to create from the middle and kind of take some emphasis away from both Robertson and Trent. So I think that fills me with hope. But I just think, I think Liverpool have missed an opportunity to strengthen that team. So I think we will see Man City take their crown back from the champions.
So for people, including myself, who haven't watched Liverpool during pre-season, is it right that Klopp is going to go 4-2-3-1, back four of Robertson, Gomez, Van Dijk, Trent, double pivot probably of Keita and Henderson, with your front four being Mane, Minamino and Salah behind the striker, with Firmino up front? Is that kind of the vibe we're going for?
Yeah, that's what it looks like. Obviously, we'll wait to see if Henderson is back from injury, but it definitely looks like that at the moment.
And I mean, we said this. Well, I said this a couple of weeks ago. Like, Minamino can't play on the right. I think we said this at the start of the podcast. He's a number 10. He likes playing behind the striker. So the idea of having someone like him play on the right-hand side as a replacement for Salah was just never going to be a starter, to be honest, especially considering that Firmino drops into that space. So yeah, I think the idea of Liverpool playing 4-2-3-1 is interesting. The only thing I'd counteract with that is the fact that City switched from 4-3-3 to 4-2-3-1 kind of at the start of last season. And a big reason why their press wasn't as good was because kind of defensively that shape didn't work as well. Kind of the number 10 for Manchester City didn't work as well as having kind of someone sitting in front of the defence with two midfielders in front of them. We've got an interesting article on that kind of in the first edition of the Bore as well. So have a look at that if you like. But yeah, no, I think that's interesting. I went for Liverpool in second, simply because you haven't bought anyone. I mean, you've got Tsimikas, the Greek left back from Olympiacos. I hope I've said that somewhere in the region of being correct. But yeah, I mean, he looks like a decent player, but again, he's not going to get in the team in front of Robertson. You needed the backup left back, and that is essentially what he is. I think that's a wise signing, but you need more. I think Liverpool, this will be the most idiotic thing in the world if Liverpool do not sign Thiago. I think that would be ridiculous. Because I think it makes sense for all parties, because it makes sense to sell Wijnaldum to Barcelona so he can go and play for Ronald Koeman, and it makes sense to bring Thiago in so he can play alongside kind of someone like Henderson in the heart of that kind of Liverpool midfield. The final point on Liverpool, I would say as well, is the fact that Klopp's style of football under a number of seasons is unsustainable. We saw it at Borussia Dortmund where it broke down after. And the thing is, I love Jurgen Klopp. We saw at Borussia Dortmund it started to break down towards the end of his tenure, and again, that was personnel issues as well. And I just feel like with the congested fixture list that we've got this season, it will be so difficult for Liverpool to remain at the level they were previously, especially if you're kind of looking to compete in the Champions League, in the FA Cup, in the Carabao Cup as well. I just feel like it's going to be lower quality at the top end of the table this year. There has to be a slip. And I think City, Liverpool both finish on on less points, and the team to finish on more points will be the new Premier League champions, Chelsea. And let me explain why. So welcome to my TED Talk. First of all, I'm working on the assumption that Chelsea sign a new goalkeeper, and they're close to signing Mendy from Stade Rennes at the moment. So I think that'll be interesting. Chelsea, for me, are going to go 4-2-3-1. They're going to have either Azpilicueta or Reece James at right back. Then you've got Thiago Silva with one of Tomori, Zuma, Rudiger, or Christensen at centre back, with Chilwell at left back. Double pivot for me at this point in time is Kovacic and Kante, with the three behind the striker being Ziyech, Havertz, and Pulisic. Up front, you have Timo Werner. I just look at that team and I think if winning the Premier League this year is closer to 80 points than it is 100, I think Chelsea could get there. And of course, if Liverpool don't drop off, and my prediction is predicated on the idea that Liverpool and Manchester City get worse. If that doesn't happen, Chelsea aren't going to win the league. But if they do get worse, I think Chelsea have a genuine opportunity to break in to the top two and make it a top three rather than just a top two, as we've seen over recent years. And again, what I would say as well is they've shifted kind of older players from the squad who were fiercely unpopular on social media. They brought in the younger players last year. They now have more experience. I just feel like this Chelsea team kind of logically should be better this year. They've got the hallmarks of being a better team this year, and I feel like they might have enough to challenge. In terms of their first 5 fixtures, they have Brighton away, Liverpool at home, West Brom away, and then back-to-back home fixtures against Crystal Palace and Southampton. They could potentially win 4 of their first 5 matches, and if they get a decent result against Liverpool, I feel like the narrative around this Chelsea team could change drastically. At the same time, they could lose to Brighton, lose to Liverpool, and then we're having a very different conversation about Frank Lampard's team. And again, I think one of the big question marks is Frank Lampard good enough? Because again, he did okay last year, but I don't think he set the world on fire. Again, I think Dan spoke about this the last time he was on the podcast too. So yeah, I think Chelsea could be a really interesting team to watch this year. Before we do the bottom 3 of the teams who are going to be relegated, we haven't discussed this before the show, but I thought I'd fire it on you anyway, Callum. Who's going to win the Golden Boot in 2020-21?
Who do I think will win the Golden Boot? That is a tough question because obviously Vardy and Ings had great seasons this year. Will they carry on? Not sure myself. You know what? I'll go with Aguero. I'll go with Aguero winning one last Golden Boot before he leaves.
I think that's not a terrible pick. With Man City players, it always just depends on how much they're in the starting lineup, doesn't it? Because obviously Guardiola likes to switch things around. I want to say Timo Werner, although this is I said this again the other day. Chelsea just have this horrible record of ruining strikers, or strikers going to Chelsea and just not fulfilling their potential. And Timo Werner is someone who should succeed in this team, especially if they play a counter-attacking style when it's just a case of getting Timo Werner in behind and he will punish defences. If it's not Werner, I think Aguero would be probably where the smart money is at. If not, maybe a United player could do it. But yeah, I think there's lots of really interesting players in the league this year. And I really hope it's more interesting for the neutral, because the last couple of years, as exciting and as exhilarating as this 2-horse race has been, it's kind of grown a little bit stale. And I think the personal rivalry between Guardiola and Klopp has started to lose some of that fizz. And I feel like if you bring another team into the equation, it could make it a little bit more interesting for the neutral. I feel like we should probably look towards the bottom 3 now, the most exciting element of the Premier League table. Callum, who, I don't know if you've done this in order of kind of 20th to 19th and so on and so forth.
I've got a full list of teams. So if we want to go through 20th up to 18th, feel like 20th, I think we're both probably going to have the same team here. I've gone for Fulham. I think I do actually quite like Fulham. I think they're a good team, and I think Scott Parker is a good manager. I think he's got his tactics spot on, and I think in the kind of, you saw that in the playoff final, that he kind of set up a tactic and knows how to win games. But I just don't think there's a quality in the Fulham side, and kind of like looking through their transfers this year. I mean, Mario Lemina is good. I actually really like Mario Lemina. I think he should have got more game time at Southampton, but there's probably a reason he hasn't got game time at Southampton. And then the only other one is Harrison Reed, who is a youngster from Southampton. So they haven't really introduced anyone into their squad with big quality.
Yeah, I've also got Fulham to go down 20th, and that really hurts because I really, really like Scott Parker. He's someone that I hope has a really good managerial career, but I'm just looking at the players that have signed, and it's quite hard to be enthusiastic. Like, they've got players back from loan who might make a difference, like maybe that could be a positive impact. But whether or not it kind of happens for Fulham remains to be seen. And again, they've signed Knockout on a permanent deal. They've got Harrison Reed from Southampton. They've got Lamina also from Southampton. And the player that's most interesting for me is Anthony Robinson from Wigan Athletic, the left back. He's a good player, but again, Fulham already have a good left back, don't they? And it's just a case of saying, well, how much has this team strengthened? I feel like they've gone too far the other way. When they were promoted 2 seasons ago, they spent too much money and they were relegated because the team just didn't come together. And this year, I feel like they might not have spent enough money and they're going to go down under an unexperienced manager. I don't really have a lot to say about Fulham because it just makes me a little bit sad, really, because I really wanted them to do well and I like them in the Championship. And to be honest, I think Fulham are the kind of team that are going to bounce back up if they come down. I feel like they're well positioned to be that yo-yo club now. And whether or not that's good enough for supporters remains to be seen. But yeah, that's kind of where my head is at the moment. Callum, who have you got in 19th position?
So this is where we might disagree. Well, we could actually agree. It really depends on how you're feeling about your club. Because I've got West Ham in 19th. I mean, this week has been an awful week for the club. Obviously, Grady Diangana, who is probably one of West Ham's brightest young talents and was someone that had excited the whole team, including Sebastian Haller, who had freely admitted that he was looking forward to playing with Grady Diangana this year, who had supplied him, I think, what was it, three or five assists? I can't really remember. But the fact that you've let him go and your wingers on the left side this season look like they're going to be Felipe Anderson, who has not hit the heights that anybody expected. Manuel Lanzini, who has just tailed off completely ever since that kind of World Cup injury that he got, or Pablo Fornals, who is not a winger in the slightest. He's not quick enough to play on the wing. And to be honest, he looked like he was going to be a great player when he first came to West Ham and kind of got hyped up, but he's not lived up to the heights. And then your defence is woeful. I mean, you lost 5-3 or 5-2 to Bournemouth in a pre-season friendly. I know it is a pre-season friendly, but you're going into 5th season in a row with Cresswell and Masuaku as your left-back choices. And your right-back choices are not great. I mean, Ben Johnson's all right. But apart from that, there's no one there. It's a Diop. I mean, you probably should have cashed in on Diop last year when Man United came calling for him. He hasn't looked like the same player at all. And to me, I think the only couple of players that really excite me in that West Ham side are Souček and Declan Rice, which says a lot about the West Ham team because, I mean, then they're not, well, they are great players, but they're not attacking players. They're quite defensive in their mindsets. And I really think that if you lose Declan Rice to Chelsea, as it's kind of rumoured that they're going to come into him, you will 100% be going down because Declan Rice is probably the only player that has the ability to kind of single-handedly keep you up.
Yeah, I don't really disagree with anything you've said, Rick. Well, I disagree with some of the stuff. I also have West Ham going down in 19th position. On the Grady Diangana point, and again, I keep kind of promoting my articles that I've edited. I just wrote an article about Diangana's departure from West Ham for World Football Index, in which I include an extended quote from Sebastian Haller after the Ipswich Town win. West Ham, I think, won 4-1 against Ipswich a couple of weeks ago. This was just like a week before Diangana was sold. He said to West Ham TV, "We can feel satisfied about the result. Of course, we still have some work to do, but it's important to start with good standards and to perform as a team. We need to perform our individual duties, and so it was nice to score 3 goals. It is my job to score, and we believe we can do better. It's nice for us to have a kind of player like Grady. Everyone knows the quality he has, and he went on loan to West Brom, and everyone knows he performed pretty well. We're all happy to have him here, and we're going to try to use his quality and strength well, me most of all. Hopefully, he'll be giving me even more assists in the future." 7 days later, Grady Diangana left the club. Where do we even start with West Ham? This transfer really annoyed me. There's not much that the club can do that really annoys me at this point because they've kind of perfected the art. But as you say, West Ham's attacking unit to end the season, that we were playing 4-2-3-1 to end the year. We had Pablo Fornals on the left. He's a number 10. He's very slow and he doesn't like crossing. Go figure. We were playing Jarrod Bowen on the right, who's perfectly fine. That's the correct decision. That's where he should be playing. That's fine. He's a good winger. In the number 10 position, we had Mark Noble as some kind of homage to the Italian and Garnch, which just made me want to pull my eyes out. And then up front, we have Mikel Antonio. And again, I don't have an issue with Mikel Antonio playing up front. I think he's a limited player in the sense that he relies a lot on physical aspects and he relies a lot on beating people one-on-one, more so with his ability to win a foot race than his ability to dribble past people. That's not necessarily a criticism, because when we purchased Antonio, we knew what kind of player he was and has continued to be. I really like him, but he's not the polished footballer that you kind of associate with being a Premier League striker. And you just think about this, and everyone kind of attached to West Ham, involved with West Ham, was kind of signifying that, well, Diangana's going to be back in the team this year. David Gold, kind of a few weeks ago, when there was lots of pressure on West Ham's board to sign players, posted a picture on his Twitter account of Grady Diangana in West Ham training, as if to say, yeah, we've got this young, exciting player coming through. He's going to be a feature of the team this year. It didn't have a caption, but that was basically the implication. And we've sold a 22-year-old left winger who is skillful and good in the transition and is quick and looks really promising to a divisional rival for potentially up to £18 million. And you compare that to the business that QPR did with Crystal Palace. They sold Eze to Crystal Palace for £20 million. And again, there were fees involved, kind of further fees involved there as well. And that's quite hard to reconcile, because I could accept, as a West Ham fan, I accept selling players. It's a fact of life. What I struggle to accept is selling young prospects who have been at the club for a decade. He's been at the club since he was 12 for peanuts to a team that are potentially going to be really close to us in the table. That's quite upsetting, because he was and again, this is such a cliche, but it's kind of true in this example. Him coming back from loan would have felt like a new signing, because he had all the characteristics that West Ham were missing towards the end of last season. Felipe Anderson, since joining West Ham, has been absolute just rubbish. He's 36 million quid worth of player, and he's just not delivered. Whenever he gets the ball, he looks to go backwards. He has lost the spark for whatever reason that he had at Lazio. And Diangana would have been great to have in the team, and he's gone, which is pretty depressing. And again, you talk about West Ham, and the club as a whole has some really pressing issues to contend with. And again, I think it took Mark Noble 27 minutes following Diangana's departure to tweet, "As captain of this football club, I'm gutted, angry, and sad that Grady has left. Great kid with a great future." And then he finishes his tweet with 5 exclamation marks. So clearly he feels quite strongly about that. Mark Noble, the wordsmith, as always. And I just feel like the dressing room must be not in a good way at this point in time, because there were a number of players. Jack Wilshere also spoke out. Declan Rice and Robert Snodgrass liked Mark Noble's tweets. It's just a weird situation for a team to be in, kind of a week before the start of the Premier League season. And again, in preparation for the podcast, I looked at a lot of predictions by other people that they've made. And I think it was the Eye magazine predictions. Most of their pundits had West Ham either 4th bottom or in the bottom 3. And West Ham have been in the Premier League, I think, 6 years at this point, since being re-promoted to the top flight under Sam Allardyce. And we were promised the next level. And simply, we've got kind of next level nonsense instead. And again, 4 years ago in 2016, Mark Noble proclaimed that this club ain't run like a circus anymore. And the circus truly is kind of back in town at this point. Anything to add, Callum, on West Ham?
No, I think you kind of covered it. I mean, that was kind of part of my thinking anyway, that I think the club off the pitch is in a shambles anyway. And I think the atmosphere the atmosphere that could bring to the team is kind of partly why I put them down there, especially if the team do get off to a bad start and GSB decide they want to sack David Moyes again. It's not something that would surprise me anymore, because that they do just love to sack managers.
I don't actually agree with that. Throughout their time at West Ham, they've shown a reluctance to sack managers. they had Avram Grant, who was very clearly going to get us relegated, and they didn't sack him until after we were relegated. They didn't believe in Slavan Bilic and kept him for another 6 months. And I think the only one who they was slightly trigger happy with was Manuel Pellegrini. And again, I think that's because they'd already lined up Moyes to replace him. My worry is they might keep Moyes for too long, because if you look at West Ham's fixtures, we play Newcastle United to start the season, and then the run after that is awful. It's like Arsenal, Wolves, Tottenham, and then we play in the run into December. At the end of October, we play Liverpool and Manchester City back to back, and we could potentially start November having not won a game. And of course, every team runs that risk, but it's not filling me with a lot of confidence. And again, we haven't signed anyone this summer. The only person kind of to come in is Thomas Souček as a permanent signing, and I think he's a great player. He's not going to be at West Ham next season if we go down. He's far too good. Yeah, it's a bit concerning. One of the only players I'm actually quite excited and happy to see back at the club is Josh Cullen. He's now 24 years of age, which is quite surprising because he's always been this hot prospect for what seems like the past 5 years. And he might finally get an opportunity in the first team. Unfortunately, I feel like he'll get his opportunity in the first team, we'll get relegated, and then he'll be part of the squad that kind of tries to bring us back into the Premier League. But yeah, there's not much to be optimistic about. And again, looking at the outs, we've sold Albion Ajeti to Celtic for £5 million. We sold Jordan Hugill to Norwich for £3 million. They're huge losses on decent assets, to be fair. Not terrible assets. No, it's just quite sad what's going on at West Ham. I don't have much more to add at this point. Callum, who else is going to be joining West Ham United in the Championship next season?
Before this is the final one, but I think after we'll quickly go through 7th to 17th very, very quickly, kind of not in much detail. But the final team I've got going down, I said it last week and I'm sticking by that, Crystal Palace. They scored 31 goals in the Premier League last season, which is less than a goal a game. And if you keep up that record, you aren't going to remain in the Premier League. They've signed Eze, who is a good player, but is yet to probably prove himself in the Premier League, and you don't know if he will. And is Benteke or Wilfried Zaha going to step up to score the goals this season? Probably not. They've signed Nathan Ferguson, who is a good player again, looks like a good defender, but I just don't think Crystal Palace have strengthened enough. And I actually believe some of the teams around them have strengthened. Newcastle have strengthened really well. Aston Villa today signed Ollie McBurney from, not Ollie Watkins, from Brentford, who looks like a great striker. Even though they maybe paid a little bit over the odds, in my opinion. But for me, I just don't think Crystal Palace have strengthened. And if you kind of look at the teams that come up, I've said it before, I think Leeds will do well this season. And I think West Brom, I really like Slaven Bilic. I really like Slaven Bilic when he was at West Ham, and I really like what he's doing with West Brom. And I think Dean Garner was actually kind of key to his tactical setup last year. So the fact that he's got him back at West Brom, I think it could save them from relegation.
Yeah. I actually agree. I think I did a podcast a couple of days ago that's coming out on Sunday where they asked me like who's going to go down, and I said Newcastle, but this was before they had kind of players come into the club, and I'm so impressed by Newcastle's business. They've signed like Callum Wilson, Ryan Fraser. Yeah, they're not going down. They've got too much talent, and I actually agree. I think Crystal Palace might be the side to go down. I thought about this quite long and hard. I'm agonising between Crystal Palace and Brighton for some reason. Palace just, as you said, didn't score enough goals. They signed Eze, who I think will be a good player, but maybe a little bit too soon to be kind of a mainstay figure in a Premier League team that's hoping to kind of have decent aspirations. But I was quite torn on this. I struggled to pick between Crystal Palace, Aston Villa, West Brom, Brighton, and even Burnley, to be honest, because Burnley haven't really signed anyone. I know this is a little bit kind of fence sitting, but yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Crystal Palace stayed up, but I also wouldn't be surprised if they went down. Yeah, Crystal Palace could be in a little bit of bother. So, Callum, I feel like now is the time to run through from 7th down to 17th. Who have you got kind of starting 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th?
Yeah, so if I just run through mine, and you can kind of challenge me if you really want. So in 7th, I've got Everton. I think Carlo Ancelotti, Everton. I think this will kind of be the season where we start to see the kind of Everton team where fans have expected for years. I think they've made a really nice midfield trio. And I think as much as James Rodriguez has kind of dropped off massively since it's like 2014 World Cup of injuries, I think Ancelotti will get the best out of him. In 8th, I've gone for Wolves. I think McDoherty will be a massive loss to Wolves this season. And I think a lot of the players are kind of getting to an age or kind of a mentality now where they'll start to get picked off by bigger clubs. And I think it could affect the mentality at Wolves. Obviously, they haven't got European football this year, so it could be a strength enough for them in terms of fitness. 9th, which could be a rogue shout, I've gone for Southampton. They've really impressed me under Hasenhüttl. After that drubbing against Leicester last year, they've just massively improved. And if Danny Ings can hit the heights that he did last year, Che Adams can kind of bring that form he brought after lockdown. I think they'll do really well. In 10th, I've gone for Leeds. There's no hiding my opinion on Leeds. I think they'll be really good this year. I really like Marcelo Bielsa, and I think they've done some really interesting business. I mean, they've replaced Jack Clark with Jack Harrison from Man City, who I actually think is a really good player. I think Rodrigo is really interesting. He's not a striker that scores goals, but he's really good at getting players into play and holding up the ball. And I think he'll be a great acquisition. They've replaced Ben White with a defender from Germany called Robin Koch, who is a great player. He, to be honest, I think is a really, really nice signing. It cost about 13 million, but I think he's one of these players that I think he'll have a year in the Premier League and his price will skyrocket. And I don't think he's actually much worse than Ben White. And then 11th, this is really, I think, very rogue, but I'll explain a little bit more detail about this one. So Leicester City, I've got in 11th. I think Brendan Rodgers started to lose kind of the team a little bit last season, and these tactics were a little bit far-fetched. They've obviously lost their first choice left back in Ben Chilwell. And I think they've replaced him with this Castagna, who I've watched a handful of times. He looks all right, but I mean, he's not exactly the quality of Ben Chilwell. So I think Leicester will really struggle. And to be honest, I think Brendan Rodgers will be another manager who will lose his job this season. I think Leicester will struggle to kind of hit the heights that they're expecting, especially with an aging Jamie Vardy. So yeah, I think Leicester will finish 11th. Then sadly, I've got Sheffield United dropping down to 12th. I just think that post-lockdown form will kind of come back in terms of what they was doing. They've made some interesting signings. I mean, Bogle, Lowe and Ampadu will probably all be bench warmers. They'll probably come in as rotation players. They're good players, but they're not really improving the quality of the side. And I think Dean Henderson's this is a massive loss. I think I really like Ramsdale as a keeper, but they're kind of worlds apart in terms of quality. So I think it'll be a massive loss for them, and I think it could really impact them.
We agree on quite a lot, which I'm actually quite surprised about, considering how close I think a lot of the teams could be together and how many moving parts there are to this. So I agree. Everton 7th for me, Wolves 8th, Southampton 9th, and Leicester City in 10th. I think that was pretty similar.
Leeds in 10th. Yeah,
so
Leeds and Leicester
were the only ones we disagreed with. Then, and again, the only things I really need to add to what you've said, I think I agree with everything you said about Everton. I think they've just done, outside of Chelsea, the best business in the league. I find it ridiculous that they've got Ancelotti and James Rodriguez. That doesn't make any sense. Wolves, yeah, I agree entirely. I think they're getting to a stage where some of the best players are going to leave or agitate to leave, and I think that's going to have a negative impact. Southampton, we both really like Hasenhüttl. There's not much more to say. I think Leicester in 10th, just because, to be honest, I don't think Brendan Rodgers will see this season out, given how they performed after Christmas. I'm quite worried about them, and I could have put them lower, and I very almost did. And especially in Europe as well, they've got the Europa League. And again, I hate it when people talk about the Europa League in negative terms, because I would absolutely love to watch West Ham play in the Europa League. And I feel like for lots of people, especially in mainland Europe, the Europa League is still a big competition. You listen to people like Derek Ray talk about the Europa League, and it's still a competition that teams should want to be in because it is exciting. For Leicester, it's going to be a huge drag because I just feel like fixture congestion is going to really hurt them. This is where we start to deviate a little bit. I have Newcastle United in 11th. They have done really good business. I mentioned Wilson, Jamal Lewis, obviously coming in from Norwich City, and also Ryan Fraser on a free transfer from Bournemouth. It's interesting. I think a lot of those players as well would have expected to have gone to better teams. I think Jamal Lewis would have expected to go to a bigger team than Newcastle. Ryan Fraser was convinced that he was going to end up at Arsenal. Deal never kind of came to fruition. And again, Callum Wilson probably would have thought a bigger team than Newcastle would have come in. So yeah, I'm so impressed by their business. And this is from a chairman, from an owner who actively wants to sell the club. I find that quite spectacular. And again, I think the rationale at Newcastle is, well, if we stay in the Premier League, if we have a decent season, the value of the club's going to go up. And I know that's quite a negative way to look at running a successful football club, but I think ultimately at Newcastle it is a money game, and I think that's the strategy. So I have them in 11th. Then in 12th place, Sheffield United. They can't sustain what they did last year. Quite simply, it's just not possible. That they massively outperformed kind of the quality that they have, and losing Dean Henderson is huge, and Ramsdale is just nowhere near the level that he is. I can't believe Ramsdale for 18 million. Personally,
it is expensive. I don't hate Ramsdale as a keeper. I don't think he's awful. Like, he's definitely. I don't think he's 18 million, and I don't think he is the quality that Sheffield United should have gone for when replacing Dean Henderson. I think there's far better keepers they probably could have got. I think they should have gone for Emi Martinez, probably around the same price bracket. But yeah, I think we differ on Ramsdale a little bit. I think you are a little bit maybe harsh, but I mean, you probably have more experience about goalkeepers than I do.
He just strikes me as being a little bit shaky, to be honest. I just don't have a lot of it. Again, he doesn't make me feel great kind of thinking about it. Interesting kind of fact to go for. There was another Ramsdale goalkeeper at Sheffield United who plays in the under-21. So there we go. Yeah, I think Sheffield United will be all right. They won't be in the relegation conversation, but they're not going to be anywhere near Europe. 13th, and this is going to upset you, Callum. I've gone to Leeds United, simply because, well, I've bottled this actually because I had them, I think, 10th, and I thought newly promoted team, untested kind of squad in the Premier League. They've signed some players, but they've not signed lots and lots of players. And I feel like 13th is harsh. I hope and kind of expect them to finish higher, but I didn't know who to pull down lower. Essentially, it would have probably been Leicester and Newcastle. So yeah, I think Leeds will have an okay season. I don't think they're going to be in the relegation conversation for sure. And at the end of the day, this season is about Bielsa for them. It's about, can he lead them to that next level? Because again, this isn't a dissimilar team to the one that he inherited when they were pretty kind of average in the Championship. So it's a lot on the management side, and I think this is going to be one of the first times we truly get to see how far a good manager can take a team in the Premier League, because they have to outpunch their weight category, and I'm intrigued to see how well they do this year.
Yeah. See, we disagree in terms of Brighton, I'm going to say, because I've got Brighton in 13th. I think I actually really like Graham Potter as a manager. I think he's really underrated. And I think some of the business they've done this season isn't that bad. I think Lallana's a great acquisition. He's kind of a leader in the dressing room, but he's also got quality. Like, he showed that a couple of times last year when he came on against Man United for Liverpool. He was excellent, and if you can keep Lallana fit, he's a great addition to that team, and he suits Graham Potter's system really, really well. And then they've lost Montoya this season, one of the right backs, but they've signed Joel Veltman, and Joel Veltman's a quality signing. I don't know how they've managed to pull that one off, but it's a brilliant signing. And then their defence is just immediately strengthened by the return of Ben White, who they've managed to tie down to a new contract. I mean, there was a reason Leeds wanted him back, and there was teams such as Arsenal, such as Liverpool sniffing around Ben White. He clearly got the quality, and I think he really improves a really strong Brighton defence anyway. A centre-back pairing of Lewis Dunk and Ben White probably could play for England at one point, let alone Brighton. So I don't think Brighton were in relegation scrap. And then in 14th, I've gone for Newcastle, and this is purely, I think, the bit, as you said, the business they've done is amazing. But this is purely because before this week, I had Newcastle going down. I wasn't excited by their team, but obviously Jamal Lewis is a great signing. Callum Wilson kind of nullifies their woes in terms of attacking output a little bit. But I don't think they're going to push on any higher than that. I think they kind of have a similar season to last year. And I don't think fans will be upset by that if they just remain in the Prem. And then looking at 15th, I've gone for Burnley. As you said, the Sean Dyche scenario could massively impact them if he starts to become unsettled, and if they don't kind of back him in the transfer market and then his team starts to stutter. I think you could see Sean Dyche either leaving or being sacked, which could be massive, because I don't think Burnley probably can get a better manager than Sean Dyche. But if we're going on the fact that Sean Dyche will remain through the season, I think Burnley will be safe and I think they'll be comfortable. And then just the last three, I've got Aston Villa. I think the signing of Ollie Watkins is a great signing. And Aston Villa, I think they'll kind of start to gel in the Premier League a little bit more this season. I think the fact they've been able to hold on to Jack Grealish is massive for the club. And I don't think many people would have said that at the start of the transfer window. And then final team is obviously West Brom. I think they'll be in a relegation scrap, but I've kind of already said my piece on them. I think Slavan's a great manager, and I think that they'll be comfortable in the end staying up.
I don't deviate too far from what you said. I had Burnley in 14th. They finished, I think, 11 last year. I just see them slipping a few places, to be honest. I feel like they needed to sign some players, and they haven't. Brighton in 15th. Again, I quite like Brighton. I think they'll do okay. I just worry about the number of goals they might score, because, as you say, they've got a really good defence. They've signed Veltman. They've got Ben White back. How many goals they score remains to be seen. Obviously, they sold Aaron Moy as well to China. I think he's gone to the Super League. So, yeah, I think Brighton will do okay, but again, I don't think they're going to set the world on fire. Aston Villa in 16th. And again, I was more worried about Aston Villa until they made a couple of signings this week. They've signed Watkins. I think they've brought in a couple of other players too. I feel like the treading water under the current management. I feel like they need... And again, this is quite harsh because he did lead them to safety last year under quite kind of personally tragic circumstances. I'm not sure how far Dean Smith can take this team. And so, yeah, that's why I have them towards the bottom end of the table. And then staying up just about, I have West Brom. To be honest, I'll put all my cards on the table here. I really was very close to putting them in the bottom three, kind of very, very close. So I feel like I might be letting my kind of Slavan Bilic bias seep out a little bit. I can't really explain this because I feel like they probably should be relegated, if I'm being totally honest. I don't think they've added that many players. However, I hope they stay up, essentially. I know that's not very analytical, but I think Grady, as we've said, I think Grady Diangana in that team is a huge plus, because neither Slavan Bilic nor David Moyes thought the transfer was going to happen until it did.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of changes the mood both at the Hawthorns and the London Stadium.
Yeah, I also just think Kipre is a good signing as well. He kind of proved himself Championship, and I don't think he'll be awful. They haven't lost anyone from their team of note, which sometimes you kind of do when you're coming up as a Championship side. Sometimes players get picked off by the bigger Premier League clubs. But I just think West Brom will be comfortable. I think Slavan proved himself as a Premier League manager during that season with West Ham, where you kind of defied all the expectations and was going for a Champions League spot at one point, which is yonder year now. But I think they'll be comfortable.
I think we have slightly different, and again, I think it's partly because I had a season ticket at the time, but I think we have slightly different perspective on how good Slavan Bilic is. Although 2016 was kind of the best year to be a West Ham supporter, the fall off after that was pretty horrible to see. And even though I don't think that was Bilic's fault, I still am adamant that if we signed William Carvalho basically Carvalho was the player that he really, really wanted to play defensive midfield. And he said for years, like, I don't have a defensive midfielder. Kayute is not a defensive midfielder. He likes to go box to box. He moves around too much. But of course, he was picked as a defensive midfielder. I feel like if we'd backed Slavan Bilic, he would still be West Ham manager now. I just feel uncomfortable putting Bilic in the conversation as being one of the better managers in the league, or being kind of up there, just because it got away from him at West Ham. And I feel like the emotional toll at West Ham was big. And again, everyone sees the video of when we lost Dimitri Payet at the press conference where Bilic was like, yeah, Dimitri wants to go, and he looked like he could genuinely cry. I really hope it goes well for Bilic, because I think he seems like a lovely bloke. And again, this is straying way, way far away from the analysis that I like to try and offer. But yeah, I desperately want them to stay up. I think I'm more concerned about Slaven Bilic than the thing is this as well is they beat us in the FA Cup last year, didn't they, West Brom? And I can honestly say that I kind of smiled a little bit, kind of made me a little bit happy the fact that Slaven Bilic had won the game, just because of the situation that faces West Ham. But yeah, I hope West Brom have enough.
Yeah, I think the fact that we also both of us went to Slav's first game at West Ham together at Upton Park in a pre-season friendly. Yeah,
Europa League.
I think that kind of draws, like, this podcast is a little bit of an allegiance to Slav because of that, because we've shared some memories of him together. But yeah, we'll see. I think we'll come back to these. We'll either come back to these predictions at the end of the season, and we'll have a laugh and be like, "Oh, why did we put them there? God, we were so predicted." Or we might be geniuses and we might have a career in predicting Premier League football.
The good thing is, though, is that we haven't actually deviated that far from one another. It's only like a couple of places in the top 6 where we've gone with big differences in like the positions that matter. Of course, if Dan returns from Scotland by the end of the season, he'll just sit there and kind of have a chuckle at our expense, whatever happens, because he would have, of course, been correct. I think that pretty much rounds up the podcast. One thing I wanted to ask you about before we left, this is pretty random because it's just happened kind of at the time of recording. Reggie Cannon has signed for Boa Vista. How does that make you feel?
I mean, I won't say I know too much about it.
Fair enough. So I will do this piece. Reggie Cannon, who FC Dallas right back, has signed for Portuguese team Boa Vista for, I think, about 3 to 5 million euros. He was, I think, one of the best right backs in MLS. He's joined Boa Vista, who are basically kind of the sister club of Lille at this point. There's lots of kind of movement between the two. And I think it's quite exciting because it could kind of give MLS players a different pathway into Europe. Angel Gomez is currently at Boa Vista as well. So next year they should have quite an interesting team. I just found it quite interesting that deal had finally gone through. I will try and ask you a question, Callum, that you do have an answer for.
It was purely because Boa Vista wore through me, and then we spoke about it last week in terms of another player moving to Boa Vista. So they kind of it seems like they're picking out some assets from the MLS, kind of in expectation that they can start to bleed them through into obviously the league when they're up to the ability. Which, I mean, I think we're going to see more and more often. I think we've had some discussions off there about how the MLS is improving. And off the record, we both said that we think the US men's national team will do quite well at the 2026 World Cup because they've got some really good players in the MLS coming through.
Yeah, the USA are quarterfinalists in 2026.
I'd say semis.
that might be slightly too rogue, kind of 6 years in the future. But no, I really like their team, and I think Reggie Cannon could be kind of a good player. And I think within 18 months, we'll probably see him in France. One final prediction of the show, Callum. I say one final prediction. I'm going to go with 2. The Champions League winners in 2021 are going to be XYZ, and the same for the FA Cup.
FA Cup, I'm going to go Tottenham. I think Mourinho's record of winning a trophy wherever he goes will kind of stand up, and I think he's a good cup manager. So I'd either see them winning that or the Europa League this season. To be honest, I think they'll finally get their hands on a trophy, and then. For the Champions League, I don't know. I think again it will probably be a Bayern Munich Liverpool final. I think after Liverpool's kind of disappointment this year, I think if Liverpool had got through that round after Adrian kind of let the side down a little bit, I think we probably would have made our way to the final. So I think I can't see 2 teams in Europe that are better than us, and I don't know if PSG will go on to do what they did again. So I think out of Bayern Munich and Liverpool, I think Bayern Munich might retain it.
Interesting. I'm also, well, actually, I'm going to say I'm going to completely disagree. I'm going to go Everton to win the FA Cup.
I thought you meant Champions League. I was like, how are they going to do that?
No, I think Everton. Well, yeah. I mean, who knows? Chicago Fire almost won the World Cup. We've got to remember. So yeah. But no, I think Everton, as we've said, have a really interesting team. They've got a great manager, and if it clicks, I think they've really got the potential to go quite far. In the Champions League, I tend to agree. I think Bayern Munich are definitely in the conversation. I think Liverpool will be in the conversation. I don't know. I should have thought about this before I asked the question, shouldn't I, really? I'm actually going to go Bayern Munich as well, just because, and I mean, people talked about this year as being kind of the last hurrah for the squad. A lot of them are staying for next year as well. And I look at Real Madrid, I'm not particularly enthused. I think, again, if you look at Barcelona, even though they're keeping Lionel Messi, it's quite difficult to get excited about that team at the minute. Juventus are simply cursed. They're not going to win the Champions League. And I think PSG will really struggle to come back from what happened last year, because I honestly think they believed it was theirs to win and it slipped away, and the final was quite close as well, so kind of the psychological blow could be interesting. And again, we talk about PSG, this is probably going to be the final year potentially where they have both Neymar and Mbappe. I'd be surprised if they both stayed another 2 seasons. So yeah, I think Bayern Munich to win the Champions League too. Callum, before we sign off, any final thoughts?
No, the only final thought, I guess, is this kind of more of a political, in terms of football politics, is I hope that they continue to put all of the games on live TV, because I'm looking forward to spending my month of September literally watching back-to-back Premier League games. So let's hope for more of that.
I agree. I really hope they keep that going. I think, and again, I say this as someone who likes kind of non-league football as well. I think the 3 p.m. blackout is silly. I don't think it really works, because if you really want to watch a game at 3 o'clock, there are ways to do it. And B, is quite anti-competitive. I feel like non-league clubs should be able to draw in their own supporters, whether or not Man U are on the telly or not. And again, it's going to have an impact, but there's ways around it, isn't there? I just like to think that people support the non-league teams because they support the non-league teams, rather than just thinking, well, I'll stay at home and watch it on the telly. And a lot of these people, and again, it's easy to forget, a lot of these games are on Sky, and a lot of people don't have Sky. Like, I don't have Sky. So if it was the choice of watching the game on a Sunday, or going to kind of watch a non-league team, it is difficult, isn't it? But yeah, no, I think the 3 p.m. blackout should just be a thing of the past, if I'm being totally honest. That, I feel, is probably the end of this week's episode of the Pre-Match Pint podcast. My name has been Luke James. You can follow me on Twitter at LukeJames_32. I've been joined by none other than the Hornchurch Philip Lam, Callum Ison. Where can the people find you on Twitter?
You can find me on Twitter, simple, at Ison Callum, ISON.
And you can also follow the podcast at Pre-Match Pint on Twitter. Pre-Match Pint Pod, I think. Who knows?
Yeah.
You'll be able to find us.
It'll be in the description. Just go look.
It'll be in the description. Scroll down. You can do it. Anyway, that brings another episode of the show to an end. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure you subscribe and leave wonderful reviews. Until next time, keep your head up, beat your side trap, and we'll see you soon.